10 p.m. the Python code would take a backup at the appropriate timestamp and would upload the backup to S3 bucket. So that made the life quite simple. So what are the learnings from the requirement that we discussed? First important learning is if a particular task has to be done in a repeatable fashion, it must be automated. Otherwise, it will make your life difficult. So one key learning here is automation. Now when we discuss about automation, point to note here is that depending upon the type of task, the tools that you will be using for automation will also change. For example, the task of database backup that we were discussing, I had implemented it through Python. Now, depending upon the task that we have, you can use various other set of automation tools like Ansible, CloudFormation, Terraform, etc. Alright. However, the key here is that the repeatable task must be automated. Now, the main aim of today's video is automation from infrastructure point of view. So let's understand this with an example of single service deployment. So let's say that there are certain set of resources like virtual machine, database, S3, AWS users, etc. that must be created with the exact similar configuration in different set of environments like development, staging, production, etc. For example, you have a development environment where you have to go ahead and create a set of resources required to make your application up and running. Now here you have virtual machine, you have database, you have the object storage, you have the AWS user. So this is in development. Now after your application is working perfectly in development environment, you want to replicate the exact setup with the exact configuration in the staging environment also. Alright. So similar kind of configuration needs to be deployed in staging. Now everything is working well in staging. Similar kind of configuration you have to deploy it in production environment and so on. So this is part of single service. Now in a medium to large scale organization, you can have hundreds of such services. So are you going to manually create it in development environment, then in staging, then in production? One of the disadvantages of manual configuration is that, let's say today you have created the entire architecture in development environment. Now after 6 months, someone will tell you to replicate it in staging environment and you will forget what are the configurations. So you'll have to look into the configuration individually and based on that create the resources in staging environment. There is always a room to error. You might have misconfigured something due to which the application is not working in staging environment and so on. So this is quite a time consuming approach if you deploy things manually. So again, as we know that since things are in a repeatable fashion, we need to make use of automation. Now, as we know that there are various tools for automation. You have Python, you have Ansible, you have Terraform, CloudFormation, etc. So which tool you will be using for automation? It will be an infrastructure as code tool, primarily because here we are creating some set of infrastructure like virtual machine, like the database server, etc. So if we look into the automated way, here you use some kind of a infrastructure as code tool to deploy the entire infrastructure in multiple set of environments. So today, if you have deployed the development environment through IAC tool, even after 7 months, if the team says that you have to deploy the exact replica of this infrastructure in a staging environment, you don't have to worry because the code is already present in the IAC tool. All you'll have to do is you have to deploy it. So with this understanding about the importance of automation in creating the infrastructure, let's go ahead and discuss the basics of infrastructure as code. So at a high level overview, infrastructure as code is the managing and provisioning of infrastructure through code instead of through manual process. For example, let's say you want to create a new server in AWS. So you can go ahead and manually log into your AWS account, manually create a new server and so on. So that is the manual approach. In infrastructure as code approach, you create a code and through the code, your IAC tool can go ahead and deploy the infrastructure for you. Now again, depending upon the IAC tool that you use, the code will be a little different accordingly. For example, if you see on the left hand side, this is the code to create a new server in AWS through the IAC tool of CloudFormation. Similarly, on the right hand side, again you have the code to create a new server in AWS through a IAC tool of Terraform. Both will go ahead and create a new server in AWS, but you see the code is a little different. But the common thing here is that the infrastructure is getting deployed through code. Nothing is done manually. Now, depending upon the organization and the type of requirements, the IAC tool that you will be using will also change. Some organization will use CloudFormation, some organization will use Terraform, etc. Personally, I have used CloudFormation and Terraform quite extensively, and from what I have seen in most of the organization, Terraform is preferred. However, that does not really mean that CloudFormation is bad. CloudFormation is specific for AWS and it also has its own set of advantages. So let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and quickly have a small demo so that our concept of IAC is well understood. Now currently I am in my AWS account. As we are discussing, there are always two primary ways to create infrastructure. One is manual and one is through automation. Now let's say that I want to create a new server in AWS. What I can do? I can manually launch the instance. I have to specify the configuration, the operating system of the server. You see there are so many configurations here and I can launch the instance. So this is the manual way. This should ideally be avoided. The second way, as we are discussing, is through the IAC tool. Now, one of the IAC tools specific to AWS is CloudFormation. Alright, so let's quickly look into how things would work in such cases. Again, note that this is a demo video so that our concept of infrastructure as code is understood. You are not expected to replicate it, but just to ensure that you understand the basic concept. So, through the IAC tool of AWS CloudFormation, let's go ahead and deploy the infrastructure. Now, when you deploy the infrastructure, you see it is asking us to provide the code based on which the infra will be created. So what I'll do, I'll click on upload a template file. Now in my local desktop, I have a template, simple template that is available here that creates the basic server in AWS. This template is specific for CloudFormation here. So what I'll do, I'll upload this template. So let's quickly upload this template here. I'll do a next. I'll say cf-ec2. Let's do a next. We'll ignore all of these options for now. I'll do a next and I'll do a submit. So now what this IAC tool of CloudFormation will do, it will read the template that we have uploaded and based on the infrastructure that you have defined, it will go ahead and create the appropriate resources. So now if I'll quickly refresh, you see a new EC2 instance or a new server is being launched in AWS. You see now it is running. Great. So I hope with this you understood the basics of infrastructure as code. So before we conclude, let's look into some of the benefits of infrastructure as code. First one is that speed of infrastructure management. Now initially when you write the code, it can take some amount of time. Let's say you are writing code where 10 services are getting deployed with different set of configuration. So first time it will take a little amount of time to write the code. Once the code is ready, you can go ahead and deploy all of those 10 services to 100, 200, 300 AWS accounts in a repeatable fashion. Second, as we are discussing, is low risk of human errors. Many times when you're manually configuring the infrastructure, you might forget to set a specific option due to which your application will not run. So all of those human errors will go away here. Third important part is version control. Since you are writing the code, you can commit the code in your GitHub repository. You can have pull requests, you can have approvals and so on. And the fourth is easy collaboration between teams. So since the code is in GitHub, multiple team members can go ahead and collaborate the code to create the infrastructure required for your applications. So that's a very high level overview about the infrastructure as code and the benefit that it provides. And with this, we'll conclude today's video. Hi everyone and welcome back. Now let's say that you have gone ahead and you have understood the basics of infrastructure as code and also looked into the benefits that it provides. So now you have decided that a IAC solution is good for your organization. So the next step is to choose a right tool that allows you to create infrastructure as code. So in the industry, there are multiple set of tools that are available that allows you to create infrastructure as code. For example, you have Terraform, which is one of the most popular IAC tools that is available. You have CloudFormation, you have Heat, you have Ansible, SaltStack, Chef, Puppet, and others. Now, when there are so many tools that are available that allows you to deploy infrastructure as code, the question that comes is which among them will be the right tool for your organization? So the tools that we have been discussing, they can be categorized into two major areas. The first one is the infrastructure orchestration. The second one is the configuration management. The tools that are part of infrastructure orchestration are Terraform, CloudFormation, and others. The one that falls into the configuration management domain is Ansible, Chef, Puppet, etc. Now note that through all of these tools, you will be able to create infrastructure as code. But at overview, note that you should always prefer the infrastructure orchestration based tools and not the configuration management based tools. The infrastructure orchestration tools are specifically created to go ahead and create and manage the infrastructure. Configuration management tool primarily has a different purpose, but it also allows you to create the infrastructure, which is the secondary purpose at an overview. So let's go ahead and discuss the basics of configuration management first, post which we'll be discussing about the other areas. Now at a high level overview, the configuration management tools are primarily used to maintain the desired configuration of the systems. So in the bracket, I have added inside the servers. For example, you have a configuration management tool called as Ansible, which is very popular in the industry. And on the right hand side, you have some set of servers. So when we discuss about maintain desired configuration of systems, so for example, you want to configure your application once the servers are launched. So that is where configuration management tool comes into picture. Or once the servers are launched, you want to install antivirus agent, or you want to install IPS agent, or you want to tweak some configuration inside the server. So for all of those requirements, configuration management tool proves to be very useful. Alright, so apart from its primary responsibility of maintaining the desired configuration inside the servers, configuration management tool also provides the way to create the infrastructure by itself. For example, we were discussing about Ansible, which is one of the very popular configuration management tool. So apart from its primary responsibility, as we were discussing, it also allows you to create an infrastructure. For example, here we are discussing about creating a new EC2 instance in AWS. If we go a bit down, you see, you can go ahead and create the set of resources in AWS. This is the way, again, the documentation is quite extensive here, which you can refer to go ahead and create the appropriate infrastructure. The second major category is infrastructure orchestration. And the primary aim here is to create and manage the infrastructure. For example, let's say that you have a requirement to create 3 servers with 4 GB of RAM, 2 vCPUs. Each server should have a firewall rule to allow SSH connection from office IPs and so on. So here what we are dealing with the raw infrastructure. We are not dealing with the configuration inside the system. For example, after launching of 3 servers, antivirus agent should also be installed on all of these 3 servers. So we are not dealing with that. We are dealing with the raw infrastructure at this stage. So whenever you have such requirement, always prefer the tools that are part of the infrastructure orchestration like Terraform or CloudFormation and so on. So discussing about Terraform, again, this is an example in which you can create the EC2 instance. Similarly, if you discuss about CloudFormation, again, you have wide variety of options in which you can deploy the EC2 instance over here. So in short, we have learned that if you want to add IAC solution for your organization, always use the one that is part of the infrastructure orchestration category and not the configuration management category. However, one part that you need to keep a note of is that IAC tool and configuration management are friends and you will need it in the larger organizations here. For example, let's say that we have a IAC solution of Terraform that we have chosen and you have some configuration file that you have written. So now whenever you deploy the IAC solution, it will fetch the code that you have written and based on the code, it will go ahead and create the infrastructure. In this case, you have a code written to create a EC2 instance or a new server in AWS environment, which Terraform will do. After the server is created and running, the next important step that we need to ensure is that inside this server, you have antivirus agent running, you have your application deployed and configured and so on. So in such cases, IAC tool is not the right solution to manage the desired state inside the servers. So what you do, configuration management is the right choice. So once your IAC solution as part of the infrastructure orchestration category has created the infrastructure for you, it can connect to the configuration management tool which are specialized in configuring the appropriate state inside your server. For example, once Terraform has created the EC2 instance, it can inform the Ansible to go ahead and install and configure the appropriate application or install and configure the antivirus. So now after Ansible receives the input from the IAC solution, it can log into the server through SSH and the application or antivirus solution can be deployed accordingly. Now generally in larger organization, you will see our workflow something similar to this. Again, it's not necessary that Terraform will be used as the standard IAC solution. You will also have CloudFormation, you will also have other IAC tool. Not all of the IAC tool supports this kind of integration. So depending upon the requirements that you have, the choice of IAC tool will differ. Terraform works pretty well with this kind of a setup here. So now comes the important question, how to choose a infrastructure as code tool. So first question that you need to ask is your infrastructure going to be vendor specific in longer term? For example, are you going to only create infrastructure based on AWS platform for next 10 or 25 years? Second is, are you planning to have a multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud-based infrastructure? This is very common nowadays where some part of infrastructure is in AWS, some part of infrastructure is in data center. So this is the second question that you should ask. The third question is, how well do you want your infrastructure as code tool to integrate with the configuration management tool like Ansible, Puppet, etc. And the fourth important requirement is the price and the support associated with the IAC tool. So let's do one thing to better understand this. We'll take up two sample use cases and we'll discuss which IAC tool will be recommended for them. So in the use case number 1, there is certain requirement of organization. What is the requirement? First requirement is that the organization is going to be based on AWS for next 25 years. This is a very clear-cut requirement and this can make your decision much more simpler. Second requirement is official support is required in case if team faces any issues related to IAC tool or the code itself. For example, let's say that you have written a code to deploy a EC2 instance, but due to some reason you are getting an error. So you want someone who can read your code and can help you figure out where the issue is. So official support is required here. Third requirement here is that they want some kind of a graphical user interface that supports automatic code generation. So based on these requirements, which IAC tool will you suggest? Will you suggest CloudFormation? Will you suggest Terraform? Or will you suggest any other option here? So based on this requirement, CloudFormation is the perfect choice. For example, let me quickly show you. So I'm in the CloudFormation service in AWS and they have an option of designer here. So in this designer, on the left hand side, you have various resource types. Let's go ahead and search for EC2, which allows us to create servers in AWS. So within here, let's go a bit down. You have EC2 instance. So what I can do, I can go ahead and add it over here. Now, as soon as I've added it, you see the code is automatically generated. Similarly, let's try one more resource of security group. I'll drag and drop it here. Apart from that, you can also go ahead and connect the resources based on the requirements. Ultimately, this is the graphical way in which the code can be generated for you. So if you see the template, and this can become much more simpler. Now from what I have seen in the larger organization, they do not use the GUI way. They always prefer to do things manually by writing the code. But based on the requirement that organization had, CloudFormation is the perfect choice. AWS also has the support. So anytime you face issue with the CloudFormation code, in case if you have AWS support subscribed in your account, you can contact with the support team. They can read your code and they can help you find the appropriate issue in case if you are facing. Now let's look into the use case number 2 of organization 2. So what are the requirements? The organization is going to be based on hybrid solution. They use VMware for on-premise setup, AWS, Azure and GCP for cloud. So they have 3 cloud providers and they are also using VMware in their data centers. The second requirement is that official support is required in case if a IAC tool runs into issue. So various IAC tool like it can be Ansible, it can be Terraform, etc. There can be bugs or there can be some issues where the tool is not working as per the documentation. So in such cases, where you will go? Will you go to the community to ask for support or official support is given by the IAC tool provider itself? Generally in larger organization, official support is something that they require. Now based on this requirement, is CloudFormation the better choice or is Terraform the better choice here? And the answer is Terraform. Now Terraform has hundreds of providers that allows you to deploy resources across platforms. For example, you can use Terraform to create and deploy infrastructure in AWS, Azure, GCP, even VMware is supported. So if I'll quickly search, let's search for VMware. You see official vSphere based support is there. So based on this, the requirement number 1 is clear. Second requirement is official support is required. So now you have to ensure that this tool of Terraform has official support. Now who is managing Terraform primarily? It is HashiCorp. So does HashiCorp has official support for Terraform is something that you have to check. Now if you look into the HashiCorp Help Center over here, there is an option in which you can open the ticket. Now note that HashiCorp does not only maintain the Terraform, there are other products that it offers like Vault, Consul, etc. And HashiCorp has its own support portal with own set of SLAs for enterprises. So the second requirement is also getting fulfilled with Terraform and hence Terraform is the right choice for organization number 2. Great. So I hope with this you understood the basics about the infrastructure as code tools, different categories of them, and how you can choose the right IAC tool for your organization. So that's about it for today's video. So with this, we'll conclude today's video.